You're sticking around for more? Whoa. As you know, I converted from evolution to creation. And the first thing to go was my belief that nature could do and craft and mold and shape and do all the handiwork. I was like, no way, this had to have been the work of a master engineer. Evolution was out. But I clung to those millions of years until I found evidence against them. So then finally that went down years later in this conversion process. And I'm telling you, the last holdout from my evolutionary system that I believed growing up was the ape men. The ape men. What do I do with all these fossils that seem to show apes transitioning into humans? And every fossil gets its own big fancy name. And I just was so intimidated by all these fossils that I thought, okay, I now know that I am a creation of God. I didn't come from nature. I now know I'm a descendant of Adam. I know it biblically because everything else I've investigated shows that the Bible got it right. So maybe this issue, I'll find an answer that conforms with the Scripture also. I'm just telling you what I thought, but I didn't know where to start. So I just picked one of these transitional, these ape men forms, and I thought I would investigate it. And then over the years, I've done the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And I eventually found a trend. And the trend is this. There are only 3 categories that describe all these different fossils in this supposed string from ape to humans. And those 3 categories, I'm gonna try to equip you with these 3 categories today, so that by the time you leave at the end of our next session, you'll think to yourself, I got it. I now know what to do when the news report says, here's the latest link that you descended from this Ithacus or that Pithecus or whatever the big name is going to be. 3 categories. And guess what? I found that none of those categories is evolutionary missing link. There's three different categories. So to illustrate these 3 categories, we're going to go through 4 different examples. Just 4 over the next several minutes. The reason this is important comes from a bunch of Bible verses, like this one, 1 Corinthians 15. And so it is written, says Paul, the first man, Adam, became a living being. From what book is Paul quoting? Genesis. Is he treating Genesis as though it's myth? No. Is he treating it as though it's exalted narrative, whatever that means? No. Is he treating Genesis as though it's history? Yes. So we should do the same thing. We should follow suit with old brother Paul. The first man, Adam. And yet we have theologians telling preachers at seminaries Adam was not a real person. How do we know Adam was not a real person? Because the scientists have proven that we came from apes. That's it. And I'm here today to say the science behind the story of apes to human is really, really bad science. It's so bad that I feel no pressure to rewrite my Bible. Okay? So here's our 4 examples to illustrate the 3 categories. First, we're going to look at Ida, which was a flash in the pan, Lucy, which has a lot more longevity in our culture, and then Homo habilis, and finally Neanderthal. I've got a little arrow to modern man, but we don't need to illustrate him or her because you do that every morning when you look in the mirror. With each example, we're going to go through a little exercise because I want you to stay awake. And this is my little golf ball. Do we have golf? Is that a game here we play in California? And I'm going to grab my imaginary golf ball with the golf tee, or as my dad used to say, ball mount. And we're going to plunge it in the ground. And as I plunge my ball mount into the ground, we're going to say, let's tee it up. So it'll be something like this. Let's, and then together, tee it up. And then I'll say what the news reports said about this fossil when it first came out. And we'll see that they tee it up the same way every time, saying, this is who you came from. This is the fossil that represents your ancestor. And then we'll look at the science that the paleoanthropologists. I know, it's another big dumb word. Paleo means old. Anthropos means man. So it's a study of old men. Paleo, long dead men. Paleoanthropology. Anyway, so they tee it up saying it's your ancestor. But then the critical reviews come in, and other colleagues of theirs say, no, not an ancestor at all. So we'll let them knock it out. So what we'll do is I'll grab my golf club, and I'll say, let's, and then as I swing the club, we together say, knock it out. It'll be like this. Let's knock it out. Notice the perfect swing. I'm really good on the course, trust me. Here's our first one. Let's tee it up. And so this is Ida. And this is, I just took a screenshot of this back in 2009 when this came out in the spring. Fossil Ida, extraordinary find, is what? Missing link. We finally found the missing link after all these decades of missing the missing link. What'd they say about it in the news? This little creature is going to show us our connection with the rest of all the mammals. Says Sir David Attenborough. Oh, wait a minute. He's British. This little creature is going to show us our connection with all the rest of the mammals. And when he says it, man, it sounds so believable. So that's got to be it. The more you look at Ida, says he, the more you can see, as it were, the primate in embryo. This is it, man, the missing link. And then the guy who found it, who, if it sticks, stands to gain fame, funding, fortune. This will be the one picture in the textbooks for the next 100 years, says the discoverer. And by the way, it's not in any textbooks, and here it is later than 2009. Something happened to prevent it from getting into the textbooks. But this is what they claimed about it. This is how they teed it up. Well, on the top is a modern animal, and on the bottom are the legs, the uniquely shaped legs of this Ida fossil. They're the same. So you can go to the Dallas Zoo, if you come visit us, and you can see this exact animal leaping from branch to branch. It's a leaping what? Lemur. It's a lemur. So the colleagues, after this was, by the way, they had a National Geographic 2-hour special. This is the missing link, before this guy's, Huram is his name, his colleagues could actually investigate the fossil for themselves. But after they did, they noticed that the bones of Ida looked exactly like a lemur. So the lowlights, so the highlights were splashy, the lowlights were like under the low lines, headlines and low lines. Controversial Ida fossil is no missing link. Oh man, what happened? Well, let's knock it out. Come on, left side. Got to hear more from you. Next time I'm going to knock it out from that side. Bone crunching. That means they're taking the bones and they're measuring the length and the diameter and the twist and all the ratios, and they're saying, this looks like a dead lemur. So should I take a pair of scissors to Genesis? I came from a dead lemur. I better chop out the parts that say Adam. And there goes 1 Corinthians 15, because I didn't come from Adam. I came from a dead lemur. You didn't come from a dead lemur. In fact, the Bible says God created creatures to reproduce according to kinds. Was a lemur, is a lemur. That's a kind. Humans, Adam today, was a human, is a human. So we've been humans since the beginning. That's what science supports. And that's an example for our first category, dead animal. Hey guys, animals died. It's a bummer. But you know, Jesus is going to reverse all that. He's going to make death no more a thing. Let's look at Lucy, pictured here in a 6th grade California public school textbook just a few years ago. And the fancy name for Lucy is Australopithecus, southern ape. Laid out in the textbook for these kiddos as though it's, small, medium, large, slopey forehead, graduating to vertical forehead, And so it's leaving an impression of morphing from one shape to the other. And kids are supposed to, just by the layout, kids go, ooh, we must have come from the apes. And that's what they're suggesting very strongly, and that's what they're stating. So we get to, thank you, right half. Wake up. This is what the claims were made in 1974, published again. And made the cover of National Geographic way back then. By the way, that's how we used to get our ideas about the past, not from the Bible, but from National Geographic magazine. Today we get it on our devices, but it's the same story: evolution, evolution, evolution. And here's our new proof of evolution. This creature was an ape that walked. How do we know it walked? Because it had a lumbar curve. It's a lower back spine curve, and it had a human-like pelvis. You got to have a human-like pelvis because you need your knees pointed forward in order to walk like a man, talk like a man. Sorry, I get carried away here. And human-like knee and a human-like foot. No foot bones were found back then. So, the thick plottins. So on the left, you see a human foot and a modern ape foot. So apes include chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. And they have basically a hand for a foot. So they have like their big toe is like a thumb. What do these apes do with their hand-like feet? They grasp what? Tree branches. They live in trees, made to live in trees. They have lots of features that enable them to be happy in trees. And they can go on the ground, of course. But this is one of those features. And it turns out that later discoveries, after 74, and even into the 80s, new samples of Australopithecus were discovered that had the feet in them. And what did they find? Hands for feet. Lucy had these feet. But there's a footprint that's in these layers that we have. Our evolutionary colleagues have decided that these lower layers, with this age assignment, that's when Lucy was around and our ancestor, and humans had not yet evolved. How do we know? Because that's what the textbooks show. That's what the story is, and it shows it on a chart in a book. That's how we know. And everyone believes the chart that's in that book, so we can have the same narrative. But if we look at the actual Laetoli footprint, we see it's an exact match to humans. So in other words, they're getting the idea. They got, in the 74, the reason they gave Lucy human feet is because of the shape of the bones needed to make this human footprint. And they said, since humans had not yet evolved, therefore an ape was walking just like a man. Well, I've got a new hypothesis about that. I think that maybe a man was walking just like a man. Even though that may defy the chart that's in the textbook, it matches the science. But it would end up kind of being consistent with the Bible's idea that God created humankind to reproduce according to humankind. So that's what that looks like. Now, see, these scientists just several years ago mapped out what's going on with the skeleton of a human when a human walks in comparison with a chimpanzee, representative of ape kind. And so they got all these dots to show, to connect points of the skeleton. And what they've discovered a few really interesting features. And in fact, you're going to illustrate this for me in just a moment. Are you ready to be active right before lunch? I think we need it. So what they found is, as a human walks, the rib cage, this goes one way, but the hips go the opposite way. So it's kind of like this. When I take a step forward with my right foot, my right hip goes that same direction. Right hip forward, right foot forward. But at the same time, my left shoulder goes forward. And so what's happening is my spine is twisting. So you have to have a twistable spine in order to walk like a man. I'm a professional. I'm allowed to sing. It's okay. Like this. And actually, it's coiling a spring, and you release that coiled tension when you take the next step. Okay? And we have several gears. We can walk, jog, and run. 3 gears. But when a chimp does it, watch this. The chimp, because it has a rigid spine, a stiff spine, no twisty spine, when he or she takes a right step forward, the right shoulder goes forward too, because the spine carries it along. Okay, so it kind of walks like this. Again, I am a professional, and I'm not doing very good. Okay, so now do the test. Everyone rise, all rise. So with your feet pointed toward the microphone, I mean right here. Aim your toes here. Good job. All I want you to do is, as a human, what would a human do if you were to try to greet the person behind you without moving your feet now? Greet the person behind you. If there's no one behind you, just greet the wall. Look at all the twisty spines. You guys are people after all. Excellent job. Congratulations. Humanity. I'm not done yet. Stay standing. You got to be the chimp now. Okay. Your spine is rigid. Your knees are a little bit out. And they're always bent. You can't just straighten them out like that because you're a chimp now. Your waist is bent forward, or bent anyways. You can't stand up straight. Okay, so this is chimp. And your spine is stiff, so you cannot twist your back, but you still need to greet the person behind you. Now what you gonna do? You gotta shuffle your feet, don't you? This is the best. You guys are the best chimps I've ever had in any audience. Okay, good job. So what we see is anatomically, apes are different. Every single bone is different, has a different shape to it. Yes, we both have a thumb bone, or a radius, an ulna. We both have those bones. But the shape of their radius different, the shape of their ulna different, the shape of their, every single bone from head to toe different, uniquely shaped, so it can do what it does the way it does it. And humans, uniquely different also. Well, these are the claims, but since the claims were made, every one of them's been debunked. Lumbar curve, let's look at that. Here's the original Lucy nickname for the Australopithecus specimen here. Lumbar curve, notice the lack of bones. Now, science is supposed to start with observable. I mean, that's like 6th grade science. First, we make observations. Class, there's nothing here to observe. So the only reason they said that it's got a lumbar curve, so the curve it has to do with, so they have a C-shaped spine, which is stiff. Humans have an S-shaped spine with the curve. They said this has an S-shaped spine, but there's no bones there. They have to have an S-shaped spine and flexible so it can walk. That's why. It's not because they observed anything. It's because they believe they had to have walked, okay? Then the human-like knee there is from a bone that came from far below the other and far away, 200 feet or so away, we think. It's hard to get the records straight on that. But nevertheless, that little fragment bit right there, this one here, actually, the shape of this little bone bit does match the shape of a human, the top of a human femur. And so, you know what? These bones were all collected out of a hash of a mess of bone bits, all different kinds of animals, cats, turtles, apes, and maybe a human bone was thrown in there, and maybe that human bone was associated with this skeleton. None of the other bones came from the same individual. These bones were assembled from many different individuals to make up a single Lucy specimen, okay? So lumbar vertebrae, not there. Knee found elsewhere. Human pelvis was actually fragmented, and they repositioned it so that the femur would be up and down. Because as you know, in apes, the femur points out and not straight down. So they had to reposition the hip socket so that it was. Anyway, that's a whole other story. And it had an ape-like big toe with that thumb-like big toe. That's what it really had. It had an ape-like inner ear. So this is telling, because your inner ear is your organ of balance. And in humans, since our spine comes up right beneath our skull, because we stand upright and we look straight forward pretty much. So we have this big hole in the bottom of our skull where the spine connects at this angle. It's a very shallow angle. Anyway, the hole is called the foramen magnum for you anatomists, and it just means big hole. Your spine connects there. But in modern apes, the foramen magnum is at the back of near the back of the skull, because otherwise, if they had a human-like skull positioning, they're knuckle walkers. They walk on all fours. That's how they prefer to walk. So they'd always be looking at the ground the whole time. Or they'd have to crane their neck to see forward where they walk. And it turns out that the angle that the spine attached on Australopithecines was an ape-like angle so that they could walk on all fours. And Lucy had a locking wrist. So Lucy was just about like a chimpanzee in so many ways. It might have been part of the same kind. And here on display at the Creation Museum in Kentucky is a mock-up of an Australopithecine that's anatomically responsible, but they covered theirs with hair. Well, don't take the crazy creationist word for it. Just quote from the evolutionists from the journal Anthropology, American Journal of Physical Anthropology. Lucy's kind would have walked bent hip, bent knee, rather like a chimpanzee. That's what they say. So how can it walk like a man? So one guy says, it walked like a human. And this guy says, it walked just like a chimp. They're saying opposite things about the same fossil. So now we get to the time when we get to, let's knock it out. That was my swing's improving, right? Solly Zuckerman said they are just apes. Boom. Second category? Nope, same category. Second example, another dead ape. Guys, Lucy was an ape all the way. Its organ of balance tells us that it oriented its skull like this, not like this. So does that mean I have to take a pair of scissors to Genesis because an ape died? Not at all. Homo habilis, though, is different. But before we get to Homo habilis, check out those funky, creepy eyeballs. I took this image at the Denver Museum of whatever. And Lucy's got a human gait, human spine, human legs, human feet. Its chin is sort of up, but based on the orientation of its skull, it would be like chin down in this position. So it's anatomically incorrect from basically its jaw down. And then they gave it human eyes. Class, do eyes fossilize? How do they know the eyes look like that? Well, here's a maquette or a really well done of an actual human from Australia. This guy had really prominent eyebrow ridges and really slopey forehead. Well, there's people today with big eyebrow ridges and really slopey foreheads. And they're just as intelligent as people with up and down foreheads and thin eyebrow ridges. Anyway, he just needs a haircut. This is a maquette putting human eyes in a female human skull. I think they made her nose a little bit too big because that part doesn't fossilize either, and they can do what they want there. She needs a barrette. But otherwise, really well done. And then this is an actual photo of a real animal. The scientific name for gorilla is, no kidding, gorilla. It's like my favorite. Okay, and then here's another model of that one. Now this is based on a fossil, and it absolutely creeps me out. Why is he putting human eyes into these ape skulls? Man, is it persuasive. And now it's in the movies. One just came out this summer of these talking apes. Well, he admitted why. The artist who did these also did a maquette of Lucy, and he said, I wanted, not the data demanded, not observation required. I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face. Why? Because that's what the data demanded? No. To indicate something about where Lucy, was headed. In his imagination, where's Lucy headed? To becoming human. So in order to get Lucy to look like she's becoming human, I put human eyes in her skull. Guys, go to the museums. Take your kids there. Take the grandkids there. But ask them the questions. How do they know the eyes looked like that? What makes your eyes uniquely human? There is no animal that has human eyes. Our eyes are unique in several ways, but the big one is we have visible whites called the sclera. And with the whites of our eyes, we can look at each other's faces, and you can get all kinds of information just from looking at where I'm looking. Okay? No animal does that. Animals don't look at where the other animal is looking and then think about what that means. Like, this is a uniquely human form of communication. So, for example, at the dinner table when my daughters were younger, and we said, eat your green beans, and we got this. We just received an entire sentence. How lame of you to make me eat my green beans. I'm not going to eat my green beans. 2 sentences. So the rolling of the eyes. And so that's just one way we communicate. But it's that image of God in us where the Creator himself walked with Adam in the cool of the day and Eve and walked and talked. And so it's us being able to personally interact, and we have the equipment to do it. Apes don't. In fact, a study came out several years ago where scientists were trying to figure out how do chimps in a group, whatever group chimps are called, flocks, I don't know, chimp troop, how do they recognize individuals within the troop? And they showed pictures of the other individuals to chimps in a little chamber. And funny thing, they showed a picture of the faces, and then they showed a picture of the opposite end of the face. And it was, sure enough, it was the rear ends that they recognized. Because, chimp rear ends have these funny little flaps of skin and everything, and they recognized them. They just look gross to me, but every chimp was like, that's Sally, and they mashed the Sally button. That's Bob, mash the Bob button. And so they don't even recognize eyes. So this is uniquely human and part of the image of God in us, that we can do this. So it reveals a soul, and they shouldn't put that in the fossils. Okay, this is our next one, and we get to, hey, let's tee it up. Homo habilis, and here's an example of one. What a weird situation we have. It's from Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, Africa. And they found in 1959 mixed bone bed. Okay, you got ape skulls, chimpanzee-like. You've got cats, turtles, big cats, and little stone tools. What are we going to do with these stone tools? So, Mary Leakey, and published in 1964 in the journal Nature, some bones that she collected from the mixed bed, put them together in the form of a hand, okay? And then she found bits of skull that were skull fragments, and they matched sort of like better specimens of some ape skulls. So it's like an ape-like hand with the thumb that's way down here so that it's out of the way so it can grasp tree branches. That's what ape hands look like. Our thumbs are way up here so we can do lots of things. Everything from, with your hand, you can actually hold a sledgehammer with these 3 fingers and a potato chip with these 2 fingers, and you can walk across a room without smashing the potato chip. Chimps can't do that. We can do eye surgery, and we can use a sledgehammer. Chimps can only use sledgehammers. They can't, and because we have this particular musculature where we can do these light, fine motions, and we can move very slowly and precisely. They don't even have the capability to do that. They don't have the nerves. I'm pointing here because this is where the muscles are that control your fingers. That's so that they're out of the way. Very well designed. But I digress. So she assembled these, and she said this: We have a ape-like hand, ape-like skull, and a fossil tool. Therefore, this ape was making tools. Homo habilis. Homo means man, habilis means handy, so they call it handyman. Handyman. It was like handy ape. Now, you're smart people. What's a different way to interpret the same exact data? That's the remains of dinner. You don't even have to raise your hand. Okay. So if you got hungry enough, would you eat an ape? Yeah, I would. I don't know what they taste like, probably chicken. So what if a human used the human tool to butcher the ape, ate the ape, and then tossed the bone fragments from the leftovers into a bone pile, and that bone pile, along with everything else that it could find and eat, like big cats and turtles, became the trash heap. No wonder there's no human bones, because the humans were doing the eating and the tossing. So, hey, you guys figured it out. I wish the evolutionists would. Well, here's how Homo habilis for real. What they don't tell you is that the very first skeleton they found in that same area in Tanzania was a fully human skeleton, the whole thing. OH1, Olduvai hominid 1. And they said, well, since this doesn't fit where we need apes to be down at this layer, not full humans. So what happened here is this human died somewhere else, and then some storm carried the carcass down to this lower layer and redeposited it down here. To which I say, how convenient. Second, 6 of the 21 finger bones were not even. They were monkey. Some of them were monkey bones, and one was a vertebra. So they were just bones assembled, and they weren't even from like the same basic kind of creature. And so for that reason, and look at this, Sergio, this fella, is examining these same bones. Decades later, in 2009, he re-examined the same set of hand bones published in 1964, and he said this: OH7, that's the number that's designated to this hand bones that Mary published, most likely belongs to a robust australopith, in other words, an ape, a strong big ape, like this is orangutan hands. So it's just orangutan hands. Yeah, I can grasp bars, but they don't make tools. Well, as a result of all this mess, where you have the same fossil bones stories being told about these fossil bones, and different fossil bones of different kind of creatures brought together as though they belonged to the same creature when they never did. That's why Robinson, apparently, considers that the original Homo habilis was a conflation. Not a real thing, just a conflation of two things: Australopithecus and Homo. So that's ape parts, human parts, brought together. A guy died here, or a gal, and an ape died over there. An anthropologist finds it later on and says, hey, look at this bone from this, look at this bone from this. Maybe they came from the same individual, and voila, you've got your ape man. And that's what they're saying about it, not just the crazy creationist on this stage. Homo habilis is too variable. It's like you've got bones from all over the place to be a sound species. They don't even use it as a species very often anymore. So a lot of paleoanthropologists have dropped the name from their lexicon. To me, it reminds me of Frankenstein. Well, what is Frankenstein? Mary Shelley's classic book there. And so what did they do? They went to the morgue and the cemetery. They got a leg from this guy and a head from that guy, and Igor went and got the brain, right, and brought the brain and shoved it in there and sewed it all up, and then zap, and suddenly with electrical pulses, it's alive. And I feel like that's what my evolutionary colleagues are doing when they take bones from this area, bones from that area, bringing them together, and then telling stories about them, and it's alive, and it's only alive in their imaginations, just like Frankenstein. It's fiction all the way, which is why Tattersall and Schwartz said this in 2001, Homo habilis is, you know what, let's let them knock it out. Homo habilis, it's not a real thing. It's an all-embracing wastebasket species into which a whole variety of fossils could be conveniently swept, including, as we saw, monkey bones. Okay, so there's that. Bye-bye. It's our first example of the second category, animal plus human illegitimately positioned together. Okay, that's not a transition. It's really bad science. And our last one is Neanderthal man, so let's tee it up. And what we heard about this, what I learned from this actual Time Life book, I got a copy of it and took a picture of it just a few years ago. I was like, I remember this book from when I was a kid. And I remember reading this page, and it was like, there's Neanderthal. He's brutish, and he's ape-like, and he's becoming human. He's on the way. And by the way, we have all kinds of articles identifying Neanderthal humans as fully human. They looked a little different in some areas, in some aspects, but they looked like some modern humans in other aspects. But on the whole, by and large, human. And then when the human genome came out, compared it to Neanderthal genome, so there's DNA still in them old bones. They were able to sequence the DNA, and it lines right up with human DNA. And so we said, hey, these are descendants of Noah and Mrs. Noah after the flood. How do we know that? Where do we find Neanderthal remains? Inside, deep inside what? Caves. So European caves in southern France. So you go deep inside a cave, and there's this burial site. And they were burying their dead. Intentional burials, only humans do that. When animals die, carcass just flops over, and then it gets scavenged. But intentional burial, very uniquely human, that's what Neanderthal humans did. So we've been saying humans all along. And when the DNA came out, it was like, yeah, we've been saying this all along. They're just people. So let's go ahead and knock it out. I took this photo at the Field Museum in Chicago, and I remember rounding the corner into this exhibit hall, and there was a guy in a glass case with a grass skirt staring at me, and I was like, whoa, hey, get some clothes on. It's Chicago. It's cold around here. And then I realized that's a really well done model. It's like latex, and they do lots of paint layers, and it looks like skin. It's amazing. So it's a pretty responsible way to portray Neanderthal man. But they're fully human in every way. They married with moderns. How do we know? Because there's burial sites with Neanderthal-like features and modern, like you and me, features. And then they had kids who had a mix of both features, and they're all buried in the same spot. They cooked food intentionally. They made glue to make tools. They made jewelry, buried their dead, and genetically modern. Which reminds me of this canard about humans and chimps being 99% genetically similar. But look how different we are. I mean, every single bone is different. You'd have to have some similarities, though, because we both make hair, we both make milk, we both eat food and breathe air. So you got to have some, we make bones and everything. When people say this, I like to ask them this series of questions. How big is the chimpanzee genome? And they say, oh, I don't know. Well, it's 3.2 billion bases. How big is the human genome? Total number of DNA base pairs in the human body, every cell. It's 3 billion bases. So what's the difference? That's 200 million DNA differences. Just on the raw size, chimps have more DNA. Several hundred million more bases of DNA. What's the percent overlap? It's 94% overlap, something like that. So it's already it's less than 99%. But when you compare base for base, chunk for chunk, DNA for DNA, which our geneticist Dr. Jeff Tompkins has done, you end up with a maximum similarity between the two genomes of 84%. But here comes the evolutionary side. They say, you're a creationist and you don't want chimps to be related to humans, and that's why you got the numbers that you wanted, except that a mainstream scientist published on his site the same exact result. Dr. Bugs from England. The percentage of nucleotides in the human genome that had a 1-to-1 exact match in the chimp was 84%. So it's not 99. That's what we call fake news. Fake news. So the first category was a dead what? That was the first example. So Lucy and Ida were the first examples of the first category, which was animal. Animal, okay? Second was animal plus man, illegitimately brought together. And the third is human or man. So that's it. That's it, guys. And guess what that highlights? It highlights that Genesis got it right. Creation according to kinds. And so we see it was a dead animal or a dead man, or someone is bringing these dead man parts and dead human animal parts and bringing them together illegitimately. That's not a real category, and it doesn't show anything but bad science. Hey, don't have to take my word for it. This is the story we should see. Take this image, this icon, tip it 90 degrees, and put rock layers to it. The lowest one should be our earliest ancestor. Then we evolved into this transitional form. Then the next layer up, deposited later on, should be the next. And then finally at the top, the most recent layers should have modern-looking humans. But that's not what the layers show, not at all. In reality, we see what this guy says, talking as a scientist to other scientists, not on PBS, not on TV shows, and not to the creators of the 6th grade curriculum in California public schools, which need to have this quote in there instead of all the garbage they do have. We have all seen the canonical parade, that's this. I call it the fake parade. We've all seen the canonical parade of apes, each one becoming more human. We know that as a depiction of evolution, this lineup is nonsense. It's nonsense. He knows it's nonsense. We know, who's the we? The scientists, the experts. We know it's nonsense because we look at the fossils and we realize, oh, there's human fossils up here, but there's also human fossils way down here. There's Lucy fossils way down here, but there's also Lucy fossils way up here. They're all mixed up in the layers, showing no sequence of expected by evolution. Yet we cling to it. Why do we cling to it if the data don't reveal it? The alternative is creation, isn't it? So these are our 3 categories. You are now equipped. Consider yourself experts. So when the news comes out and says, hey, this is your new missing link, just hold your 3 categories in mind. Is this a dead animal? Is this a dead human? Or is this an illegitimate mixture between the two? It's going to be one or the other because it always has been for the last century. So I got animals, including Ida, Lucy. We didn't talk about Ardipithecus ramidus, total ape from Africa. In the illegitimate category, we have Homo habilis, which we did talk about. Java man, not man at all. It was a human skull with an ape jaw brought together. Eugene Dubois faked it and he buried the fossils beneath his house. They were hidden for 30 years. Crazy stories. Piltdown Man was a deliberate hoax by Dawson, just uncovered just several years ago. Found out exactly who did it. They found the an orangutan jaw, and he actually stained it with tea to make it look old. Then he drilled it out, and he put lead weights in it to make it feel heavy like a fossil. And then, oh man, what a mess! And we had people getting their PhDs on Piltdown Man. And whole stories were told, and evolution was propped up on these frauds. And then the whole idea of cavemen, as these brutish beasts who lived in caves. You know who I think cavemen were? Men who lived in caves. Neanderthal men, Homo erectus, human, fully human. And then Hobbit is the nickname given to Homo floresiensis. It's an Indonesian island, Flores Island, and they're just really small people. By the way, the actors who play the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings movies, they're just really small people. Does that mean they are less evolved? Does it mean they're dumber than big brain people? No, it's not the size of the brain, it's the wiring. And so those actors are just as smart and just as human as taller people, and yet they're like less than 5 feet tall, just like people were in the past, really tiny people on that island. Fully human, guys, fully human. Okay, resources on this, fully produced creation class, a DVD called Adam or Apes, starring me. Another edition of our creation collection on human origins has lots of resources and has a lot more on the genetics side. So if you're really interested in genomes and how they differ between humans and apes, this is a good book for you. We do have a big, robust book. Chimps and Humans didn't bring it, but you can order it. And the best book on this whole topic, I think, is expensive, but worth it. And if you really want to dig in, it's called Contested Bones. You had to go to icr.org/store to get these. By the way, all of our resources, I think all of them, are available as ebooks. So if you go to icr.org/store, look for the title that you want, you could find that. I talk about this a little bit in my new book, Living in Light of Genesis, also, where we have why we should treat Genesis as history and what difference it makes. What difference does it make? It means that we can go back to Paul at 1 Corinthians 15, and when he says, the first man, Adam, became a living being, he's quoting that as though it's history. We can say, there's no good science to refute anything that Paul said or anything that Genesis said that Paul quoted, and therefore we have all the confidence that we ever needed that Paul got it right. I really did come from Adam, and the first Adam is my ancestor, and I need a new a new Adam to help me out of this mess, because it was Adam's sin that brought death to me. My sin that I carry on from him brings my own death, and I'm responsible for that. But the last Adam, the Lord Jesus Christ, came and paid my death penalty for me, so that if I trust in him, I can have brand new life. All that is from the Bible, and we know that the Bible got it right because science supports all the details, the major details that are in it there.